This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Matevi Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. South Korea weighs its response after President Donald Trump ordered the Pentagon to scale back joint military drills with Seoul, citing its refusal to support U.S. efforts against Iran. Xi Jinping pays tribute to former Chinese leader Jiang Zemin, praising his role in advancing reforms in China on the centenary of his birth. And torrential rain batters South Korea, triggering a landslide that killed one person. Evacuations have been ordered and an alert sounded on the possible overflow of a local reservoir. Meantime, China's economic pain deepens in July, with retail sales and factory output slowing more than expected. Also ahead, Chinese AI models are at the center of a growing divide in Silicon Valley as Washington weighs new restrictions on U.S. access. South Korea says that it hopes better ties between Washington and Pyongyang can pave the way to meaningful dialogue. It comes as Seoul reviews U.S. President Donald Trump's call to substantially scale back military drills with South Korea. Now, the presidential Blue House says that it will continue consultations with Washington on military cooperation, including the details of the exercises. Mr. Trump had directed the Pentagon to substantially reduce the drills, as mentioned. He cited their cost and Seoul's refusal to join U.S. efforts on Iran, and what he described as his good relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un. The annual Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises began on Monday as scheduled and will run until 27th of August. Around 18,000 South Korean troops are taking part, and the drills are designed to strengthen readiness against what U.S. and South Korea see as evolving North Korean threats. And they include drones, GPS disruption, and cyber attacks. North Korea has also condemned the drills as provocative and threatened to strengthen its nuclear deterrent. But the exercises are also facing opposition in the south, with protesters rallying in Seoul on Monday against the exercises, calling for an end to the drills. The drills also come at a delicate time for inter-Korean ties, as President Lee Jae-myung seeks to ease tensions and reopen dialogue with Pyongyang. On Saturday, Mr. Lee called for talks with North Korea to establish a peace regime and replace the armistice that ended fighting in 1953. Now, he said that Seoul would take steps to ease tensions and build safeguards against escalation. But Pyongyang has repeatedly rebuffed Seoul's overtures and now regards the South as a hostile state. But for more, we are joined by Simon Marks, and usually we are speaking to Simon from Washington, but what a rare treat to have you in the studio here with us today. And of course, when it comes to all things Trump, Simon, you are our go-to guy. So let's just start with the timing of this announcement from Mr. Trump. What do you make of his latest move? I mean, how surprised were you? And I guess the question is, why now?
Surprised, Otelli, and it's a rare treat to be sitting alongside you as well here in Singapore. I mean, surprised because this seemed to come out of absolutely nowhere in terms of the precise timing, although President Donald Trump has threatened in the past to downscale America's role in these joint exercises. He's never followed through on it. But it's not just the decision to do it this time around that I think is so striking, but the reasons that he is providing. On the one hand, he says that the North Koreans have been respectful and unthreatening throughout his second term in office so far. That raises questions about whether there have been any kind of back-channel conversations between President Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un that we don't already know about. But also, he is, it would appear from the language that he used in that Truth Social posting, chiding the South Koreans and in some way punishing them for what he describes as their refusal to get involved in what he characterized as the denuclearization of Iran. And he is, as he's done in the past in this social media message, citing the costs of these exercises, describing them as totally inappropriate and hostile. I think it's worth underscoring that the exercises go ahead. They just go ahead with downgraded American involvement, but it definitely raises questions about the future direction of the relationship between Washington, D.C. and Seoul.
So based on what you've said, how do you think this is going to land in Washington? I mean, because given their long-standing role in deterring Pyongyang.
Well, I think it's going to be difficult and controversial among some of President Trump's fellow Republicans on Capitol Hill. I mean, some of the more hawkish figures, of course, had previously been led by Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who, as we know, passed away just a few weeks ago. But there will be other voices on Capitol Hill among Republican grandees who will be saying to themselves, wait a second, what exactly is going on here? I think there's no question, given the nature of the president's announcement, that the Pentagon, at least in the form of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, will line up behind it. But it will be interesting to see what Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has to say about all of this, because he, of course, will be dealing at a diplomatic level with the South Korean government. And there's no question that Seoul is going to have questions not just about the short term, but what the long term looks like. 28,500 troops based in South Korea, and a president who has hinted in the past at wanting to reduce America's troop presence in the Asia-Pacific region in the way in which the US is already doing that in Germany and reviewing its troop presence posture in Europe more broadly.
And of course, Simon, I mean, you've covered Trump through his previous dealings with Kim, including when they met in Singapore, right here in the studio where you're seated. And once again, Trump is highlighting that personal relationship he has with Kim there. So do you think this is laying the groundwork for renewed diplomacy with Pyongyang?
Well, there's no question that the President of the United States has indicated in the past that he would like to continue having a relationship with Kim Jong Un and seeing where it goes. But what we don't know, and certainly it's not been confirmed by the White House at all, and they've been asked repeatedly, is whether the two men have been in contact in any way. And indeed, at one point, President Trump last year was citing the difficulty of communication, like literal communication, between Washington, D.C. and Pyongyang. So there will be questions at the White House. It's now, dawn in the United States as the day advances about whether there has been any kind of outreach from North Korea to Washington, D.C. or in the other direction. This raises a lot more questions than we are currently able to answer.
Right, and we shall also be awaiting, see what Marco Rubio says about this call as well. Well, I'm going to let you go and rest because I know you're battling jet lag, but thanks so much for coming into the studio. It's a nice change to have you here.
Lovely to see you.
And there I was talking to CNA's Simon Marks. Well, meantime, Chinese President Xi Jinping has used an event marking the birth centenary of former leader Jiang Zemin to reflect on China's past and its path ahead. Drawing on Mr. Jiang's legacy of reform, opening up and innovation, Mr. Xi linked it to China's priorities as Beijing faces economic and geopolitical challenges and heads into key Communist Party meetings. We've got CNA's Tan Sihui with this report.
It may have been a ceremony to remember a leader from China's past, but the gathering at Beijing's Great Hall of the People also carried a message about its future. Current and former Chinese officials, as well as members of former President Jiang Zemin's family, all in attendance to mark the centenary of his birth. Delivering a 40-minute speech, Chinese President Xi Jinping described Mr. Jiang as the core of the Communist Party's third generation of central leadership.
江泽民同志充分展示了作为马克思主义政治家的雄才大略、关键作用、领导艺术，树立了永远值得我们学习、永远激励我们前进的崇高风范。
Mr. Jiang became General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1989. President Xi noted he had led China through a dramatic period of reform and opening up, and highlighted Mr. Jiang's role in taking the country into the World Trade Organization, also navigating the Asian financial crisis and other challenges.
新征程上，我们要强化忧患意识。 树立底线思维，更好统筹发展和安全。 以顽强的斗争精神、高超的斗争本领、积极应对风高浪急甚至惊涛骇浪的重大考验，坚决捍卫国家主权、安全、发展利益，续写经济快速发展和社会长期稳定两大奇迹新篇章。
That message comes as China grapples with slower growth, a struggling property sector, and weak consumer confidence. Mr. Xi stressed the need for innovation to drive the nation's progress, alongside stronger Communist Party leadership and discipline. All of this comes at a politically significant moment, with the Communist Party holding its 5th plenum later this year, ahead of a 5-yearly party congress and an expected leadership reshuffle next year. Mr. Xi also highlighted the handover of Hong Kong and Macau during Mr. Jiang's leadership, as well as his opposition to Taiwan independence. There was, however, no mention of former Premier Zhu Rongji's death announced last Wednesday. Mr. Zhu had served alongside Mr. Jiang and played a key role in China's economic reforms. His funeral is set to take place on Tuesday. Tan Su-hui, CNA, Beijing.
For more insights into the legacy of Jiang Zemin and Zhu Rongji and how they transformed China, I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Chen Gang. He is Deputy Director and Senior Research Fellow at the East Asian Institute at NUS. Coming up on East Asia tonight, Japanese economic growth showing a surprise slowdown in the second quarter as capital expenditure dropped along with consumption. Plus, Alibaba's Qwen overtakes rival models in downloads, becoming a major force in the global open AI ecosystem. Hello again. You are watching East Asia tonight, and Roland Lim is here with us with the very latest in business news. Roland, we've got fresh data out of China today. How did it go?
Yeah, not very well. A disappointing set of results. Today's figures, worst in decades if you discount the COVID pandemic. Analysts say the pressure is on to accelerate fiscal stimulus measures. China's economy extending its slowdown. Fresh data show weakening across the board. Retail sales for July up 0.6% on year, less than the 1% growth in the month before and lower than analysts estimate. Industrial production expanded at a slower rate for the first time in 3 months. It's up 4.5%, lower than June's 5.3% increase and missing analyst estimates as well. Fixed asset investments slumped 6.7% in the January to July period on year, and that's worse than the 5.7% drop in the first 6 months. Weak domestic demand and disruptions caused by extreme weather are slowing an economy that's already weakened by months of fiscal austerity. Heavy rainfall and strong winds swept through large swathes of China last month, temporarily shutting down factories and ports, leading to power outages and forcing tens of thousands of people to evacuate. Disruption may have only a temporary impact, but policymakers are likely monitoring the data closely as they assess whether more aid is needed to the economy to ensure their growth goals stay within reach. Chinese equities closing with solid gains, though optimism in tech overshadowing the softer economic figures. Shanghai Composite ending the day 1.4 in the green. Shenzhen doing better, advancing 2.4%. Hang Seng's index in Hong Kong up 1.3%. Now joining us to break down the Chinese numbers, we have Dan Wang, China Director of Eurasia Group, speaking to us from Anyang in China. Dan Wang, the Chinese economy actually slowing down or just catching up, really, with the export front-loading that's wearing off?
Well, the economic figure in July is actually very much in line with most of the expectations. The only surprise was the fixed asset investment. It essentially collapsed and got even worse than June and May. So one thing I have picked up in my trip in China, which I just finished in the past 2 weeks, is that officials are quite comfortable actually with where China is. A bigger stimulus plan on the long-term infrastructure is in place already, and they believe that export momentum will continue. So it looks like the economy is still on track as they have seen it, but domestic demand remain in a very weak state.
You said before that Beijing cares more about guarding risks than stimulating growth. In this road trip of yours, is that still true? What if unemployment breaks above that 5% level?
Actually, if you take a trip in China, big cities, small cities, there's a wide range of underemployment. It's not necessarily that people cannot find a job, but they cannot find a good job with a long-term contract. So the income prospect is quite poor. Job market is the weakest in the past 4 decades. But given that, because people actually find it's more affordable now to live in China, at the same time, there's more free time in hand. So everywhere you go is quite crowded. And I can see that Chinese government now is prioritizing debt resolution ahead of GDP growth. They see the 4.5% to 5% GDP growth very achievable this year. Even with the collapse of fiscal asset investment in the second quarter, we're still looking at 4.7% of growth. So in the second half, there will be more special purpose bond and the central government long-term bond to support those 6 nets and other type of infrastructure. So as far as we see the growth number going, it is actually quite manageable.
And speaking of jobs and confidence, retail sales performing worse than expected at 0.6%. Why is it proving so difficult to persuade households to spend? I mean, is this fundamentally about property, jobs, and confidence?
The biggest constraint is still housing. We can see that housing prices and housing sales in most cities are still declining double-digit. And it has been like this in the past 4 years. Comparing to the peak housing price in 2021, now, different cities actually already saw 30% to 50% down in housing prices. And for Chinese households, 80% of their household wealth is in housing. So that has been a major constraint on their consumer spending and consumer confidence. But one positive signal now is that stock market is doing better. For some population in big cities in China, they're actually gaining some wealth from the stock market. So on the margin, it is a bolstering effect. But generally, people don't feel comfortable in splurging on cars or other large items unless there is a big program to boost the job market. I can't see the consumer market being turning around.
Well, the smart money knows that China needs easier monetary policy, but Beijing at the same time also wants a stable yuan. Can it have it both ways, or is currency stability now limiting the PBOC's, the People's Bank of China's ability to actually respond to a slowing economy?
Well, the PBOC has stopped using monetary policy as a counter-cyclical measure since 2022. And we can't forget how special 2026 as a calendar year is. It is the starting year of the 15th five-year plan. Also, it is the 1 year before the 21st Party Congress. So all the attention has been paid to guarantee the stability in the society. The government will not induce any major policy response to the economy. Given that they still have confidence on sustainability of export and industrial sector, then there's no point for them to cut interest rates. And for the central bank especially, they prioritize the health of the commercial banks and stability of currency ahead of growth. As a result, there's very little intention to actually lower the interest rate. And given the evidence from past 4 years, even if the interest rate is lower, there's really not enough demand from domestic economy to actually take out loans from the commercial bank, then they actually prefer to keep that policy room in hand.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, then a weak domestic print like today, that's unlikely to crack Beijing's resolve.
Very much so. And I also can see this as a long-term trend because the market now believes that RMB will have a long-term revaluation bias. So the central bank is very busy stabilizing the currency valuation in this very critical year. And given that how fragile actually the export sector has been, although it's performing quite well, but we can see a lot of small businesses are struggling with high tariffs and all kinds of pushback from the US market and European market. But the government hasn't really rolled out any bigger stimulus plan or supporting plan for those exporters. As a result, they're actually keeping the RMB quite expensive for those exporters. So I understand that the policy priority for this year and next year actually is quite different from the pre-COVID era. We're now looking at a period without major reform or any structural changes in the macro policy response.
And looking beyond this month's data, what worries you more, that China's economy slows down further, or that Beijing actually continues supporting manufacturing and exports while consumption remains weak?
Actually, what worries me most is still the job market. We're looking at 12 million fresh graduates coming out every year, and it's going to be about the case in the next 5 years. And the national policy still very much focus on the high-tech industry. The government doesn't really want to boost domestic demand. They want to develop high-tech industry. They want to explore the overseas market and expand in the global south. So domestic demand at current state is mostly in stagnation, and that seems to be a policy intention. So as a result, anyone who's graduating in the next few years from Chinese universities will have a very difficult time landing on a good job. They probably need to also go through retraining program. And the government has to do a lot to maintain social stability. And that can create some tensions, unnecessary tensions, actually, in the coming years in job market.
Okay, sounds like Beijing does have its challenges ahead. Thank you, Tan Wang. That was Tan Wang, China Director of Eurasia Group. Japan, too, dealing with a decline in consumer appetite. The economy grew at a slower pace in the second quarter, giving the Bank of Japan less room to press ahead with rate hikes, which is a blow to the yen after its intervention-fueled rally faded. Preliminary data shows the country's GDP expanded at an annualized pace of 1.1% in the June quarter, massively missing estimates of 2% growth and below first quarter figures. The weaker economic performance could keep Japan's central bank more cautious about monetary policy, or tightening, I should say, as it seeks to normalize policy. The policymakers kept the key rate unchanged last month, but upgraded its growth outlook for the year. Market pricing still puts the odds of a September BOJ hike at close to 80%, up from just 60% last week. A Bank of Japan path towards higher rates would make the yen more attractive. But weaker growth could complicate the path and make it harder for the Japanese yen to regain ground. The currency has now fallen for 2 straight weeks against the dollar, surrendering much of the gains it made after the rare US-Japan intervention in July. The yen now still holding below the 160 per dollar level, which is viewed by markets as a threshold for possible intervention. Nick Farris, Chief Investment Officer at Vantage Point, says Japan may need to raise rates if growth and inflation stay resilient to stem the yen's weakness.
What we've seen again in the Japanese yen episode and the intervention that happened soon after the Federal Reserve meeting at the end of July is that interventions only buy you time. They don't solve the fundamental problems. So really the answer for the Bank of Japan, if growth and inflation remain or re-accelerate or remain resilient, then the Bank of Japan has to put up rates to an extent to offset that. Otherwise, the release valve will be via the currency, and the Japanese yen will continue to depreciate. So the only answer that they have really is actually to raise rates. As long as the currency depreciation is managed steady, as long as it's not rapid. If it becomes rapid, I think then it becomes much more problematic, and you risk a much more disruptive episode in markets where the Bank of Japan is forced to hike rates more aggressively, and or you get Japanese institutions repatriating their foreign assets in order to reverse some of that yen weakness. I think that it's the speed of the adjustment that matters.
China's push to build a global AI ecosystem is gaining traction, with Alibaba's Qwen models now leading the world in downloads. It has racked up more than 3 billion global downloads in the past 6 months, far exceeding downloads from Google and Meta's artificial intelligence models. And that's according to data from open source AI hub Hugging Face. Qwen's growing adoption points to its Alibaba becoming a major force in open AI ecosystem, putting it ahead of many US rivals, as well as Chinese names such as DeepSeek, Moonshot Kimi, and Minimax. And that'll do it for business at this hour.
Thanks so very much for that update, Roland. Well, coming up next on East Asia tonight, China today marks the centenary of former President Jiang Zemin's birth, just days after the death of former Premier Zhu Rongji. We look back at the reform era they shaped and discuss their legacy with an expert next. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Chinese President Xi Jinping pays tribute to former leader Jiang Zemin on the centenary of his birth, as Beijing draws on Jiang's legacy of reform to chart its future. Also in China, economic pain deepens in July, with retail sales and factory output slowing more than expected. Plus, South Korea weighs its response after President Donald Trump ordered the Pentagon to scale back joint military drills with Seoul, citing its refusal to support U.S. efforts against Iran. Well, Mr. Trump's decision puts renewed focus on a key pillar of the decades-long alliance between Washington and Seoul. South Korea has been a close American ally for more than 70 years, and the countries have regularly conducted military exercises on and around the Korean peninsula. But the scale of drills have fluctuated over the years. In June 2018, after his first summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un, Mr. Trump suspended several major exercises. Now, he said it was inappropriate to have war games while the two sides were negotiating, and also pointed to their cost. And then, in February 2019, the second Trump-Kim summit ended without an agreement. And soon after that, the U.S. and South Korea replaced their major spring exercises with smaller-scale training. Well, Mr. Trump again cited the cost, saying he wanted to save hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, exercises were then further scaled back during the COVID-19 pandemic, but large-scale field training resumed in 2022 as Washington and Seoul sought to strengthen readiness against North Korea's growing nuclear and missile capabilities. And I've got Sean King, Senior Vice President at Park Strategies, telling us how Mr. Trump's decision could have an adverse impact on relations between the allies.
South Korea is one of the leaders in munitions production. If anything, we should be making nice with South Korea to help fill the shortfall of our own weapons production. Yep. You know, South Korea has sent so much to Poland so it can supply Ukraine, because South Korea has a law against sending weapons directly into a conflict zone. Also, they've sent so many weapons into Gulf partners of the United States who are now targets because of our war against Iran. And Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, or War, I should say, in December, he singled out South Korea, Israel, and Poland as model military allies who would receive preferential treatment from the United States. These kinds of statements on True Social show that our word is not worth much if we could do such an about-face so soon. Both parties in South Korea have an interest in strengthening military capabilities. On the right, the PPP, the former government under Yoon Suk-yeol, they want to strengthen the military to counter North Korea and eventually mainland China if necessary. South Korea eventually, as does Trump himself for them, wants to take operational control of its forces in wartime. And to do that, it has to pass certain thresholds, which include certain military capabilities. So everyone in Korea is increasing the military and increasing munitions only for the exports. But South Korea does not want to do that without the U.S. Remember, South Korea has invested $96 billion in the U.S., which is twice as much as we've invested there, and they cover the majority of our troop costs. I mean, they're not a freeloader. They are a model ally. So I expect them to try to lean on Trump to keep us engaged and look for more cooperation with Japan as both allies try to survive the second term of Trump.
Taiwan's government says that it will propose record defense spending for next year. President William Lai says that total spending will exceed $35 billion, describing it as an investment in peace. But the proposal is likely to face resistance in the opposition-controlled parliament. Well, this year's budget was only approved on Friday after a record delay, with the two main opposition parties previously saying that they will not hand blank checks to the government. Now, the planned increase comes as Taiwan faces growing military pressure from China. Well, Beijing claims that the island has its territory and has not ruled out using force to reunify with it. Taipei has also faced calls from the U.S. to spend more on its own defense, and the proposed spending would push the total above 3% of the island's GDP. A Japanese defense minister, Shinjiro Koizumi, is set to begin a 5-day official visit to Australia and India. The trip comes as Japan strengthens defense ties with like-minded partners in the Indo-Pacific and amid growing concerns over China's expanding military presence in the region. In Canberra, Mr. Koizumi is expected to discuss the joint development of a new warship with his Australian counterpart. The vessel will be based on Japan's advanced Mogami-class frigate. It's been described as a stealth-oriented and multi-mission warship designed for modern naval operations. Now, Mr. Koizumi will then travel to India for his first meeting with the country's defense minister. Talks are expected to follow up on agreements reached at last month's bilateral summit. Tokyo and New Delhi have agreed to expand cooperation on defense equipment and technology, including the joint development of drones. Mr. Koizumi is also scheduled to visit an Indian naval base during the trip. Two distinct leaders, one defining era. Together, Jiang Zemin and Zhu Rongji led China through one of the most consequential periods in its modern history. And today, Beijing marked Jiang Zemin's 100th birthday, coming just days after the death of the former premier Zhu Rongji. Now, their years at the top helped to transform China at home and expand its influence abroad. Taking power amid deep uncertainty in 1989, Jiang guided China into a new century, opening its economy and redefining its place on the world stage. Alongside him was Zhu Rongji, a tough, no-nonsense reformer who pushed through painful but radical shifts toward a market economy. Now, that partnership culminated with China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001, ushering in an era of massive urban growth, emerging private enterprise, and profound societal change. What defined their dynamic and how much of their legacy still shapes China's trajectory today? Well, we've got Dr. Chen Gang, Deputy Director and Senior Research Fellow of the East Asian Institute at National University of Singapore, to unpack all of this for us. So, Dr. Chen, let's just start with the bigger picture here. When people look back at the Jiang and Zhu years, what do you see as a defining story of that particular era?
Actually, this is a rare moment when the Chinese people, especially the Chinese leadership, is commemorating the two leaders who jointly shaped the trajectory of China's economic modernization. Jiang himself actually was an unexpected leader after the 1989 Tiananmen incident. He was facing tough internal and external challenges, including China's economic stagnation, as well as the international isolation, especially the sanctions from the Western countries over China's human rights issues. Jiang was adapting to all these challenges by following Deng Xiaoping's economic liberalization policies. And also he was trying to improve relationship, and he was quite effective in doing so by managing to improve relationship with many countries, especially Western countries, United States in particular. Zhu Rongji himself actually was focusing on China's tough internal economic issues, including the inefficiency of the state-owned enterprises. And also one of his main tasks was to liberalize and privatize China's economy following the market economy principles. So both of them actually were cooperating quite well and managed to bring China to the trajectory of spectacular economic rise. Just now you mentioned China's entry into WTO. I do think that that was one of their major contributions to China's modern history, because the entry into the WTO helped China unleash its economic productivity and boost its, especially the manufacturing and export sectors, which still has profound impact upon today's economic order and political order. So I do think that they have left a lot of legacies upon China's economic modernization.
So, I mean, those changes, including China's accession to the World Trade Organization, basically transformed China's place in the world. So the China that emerged from that period became obviously more integrated with the global economy. And how do you think those years actually reshaped China's relationship with the rest of the world?
Actually, at that time, there were different voices, even inside China, about whether to join the WTO, because many people thought that this kind of entry would impact China's own industry. Many people thought China's domestic industry still needed protection from the government, and they do not want this kind of international competition. Rongji managed to persuade different interest groups, and also he was smart in using this kind of external pressure of the WTO entry to push a lot of Chinese domestic reforms, including the state-owned enterprise reforms, the legal reforms, as well as the privatization of many sectors. So actually, the entry into the WTO became a very positive news for China later on. And a lot of people understood that actually it was painful at the moment, but it gave China tremendous benefit in the long run.
And Dr. Chen, we fast forward today, China is obviously operating at a rather very different environment. How does China's approach today, I mean, how its governance today compares with the Jiang and Zhu era? I mean, you've talked about a lot of policies and ideas being continued, but also where do you see a clear shift, a different direction that the current administration is taking?
Of course, currently China is in the era of Xi Jinping, which is very different from Jiang and Zhu's era. The market economy continues, but there are more regulations from the government, and economic growth sometimes is not prioritized in front of national security. And the relationship with many other countries, especially with Western partners, are not that satisfactory as compared to Jiang and Zhu's era. And Xi Jinping these days, I think he emphasizes more on China's domestic capacity, the self-reliance, the dual circulation. But I do think that China's reform and opening up continue. The market economy continues, the privatization continues. Actually, if we look at the number of billionaires and millionaires in China, I do think that the number is still on the rise if we still follow the number of IPOs on the China's stock market. Especially recently, some domestic companies got listed doing businesses in memory chips or robotics. So I do think that the animal spirit is still there in China.
Yeah, can you elaborate on that? Because we talked about
Despite
IPOs, we talk about self-reliance, and today's competition is increasingly centered around technology and innovation. So, I mean, the Jiang-Zhu years, as you mentioned, laid the foundation for China's progress, economic rise, that sort of thing. But now that we're entering the age of AI, how much of China's ability to compete in this new era also can be traced back to the reforms of the previous era?
Actually, I do think that Jiang Zhu and Xi Jinping, actually, they do share some kind of consensus, which is that China has to use the external pressure to push China's own reforms and also to push the Chinese entrepreneurship forward, because sometimes if we lack this kind of external pressure, China will also lose the momentum of growth. So for Jiang Zemin and Zhu Rongji's time, they think that the WTO entry was the pressure. And now Xi Jinping thinks that the geopolitical tension, the competition with the United States, and to some extent, the sanction from the West can also be used as a kind of pushing force for Xi Jinping to stimulate the entrepreneurship in China. And we do see that there are some breakthroughs in some key sectors despite the sanctions from the United States.
So, Dr. Cheng, finally, as people are reflecting on their legacy, and you mentioned about using external pressure to push for entrepreneurship, but aside from that, what do you think is the next big lesson that today's policymakers, whether they're inside or outside of China, might draw from that period? What would that be?
Actually, there are still many lessons for today's leadership to learn from. For example, there are side effects for Jiang and Zhu's reform. Despite their strong rhetoric on corruption, on pollution, actually the corruption and pollution remained unchecked in those days. And also, I think there was the unfair distribution of wealth during this progress. Zhu Rongji's state-owned enterprise reform actually also led to the layoff of millions of workers in some provinces. So there are costs and side effects for this kind of painful reform and opening.
Well, thanks very much for showing us why the legacy continues to shape China and the world today. Dr. Cheng Gang, Deputy Director and Senior Research Fellow of the East Asian Institute at National University of Singapore. Well, time now for a short break, but coming up on East Asia Tonight. At least one person is dead after torrential rain triggered a landslide in South Korea as floodwaters submerged roads and homes. The death toll from record-breaking rainfall in Japan's Chiba prefecture has risen to 10 after officials confirmed another fatality. Chiba city received 3 times its average rainfall for the entire month of August in just half a day, triggering widespread flooding. Some 1,500 homes were affected and 2 houses destroyed. As floodwaters recede, attention is turning to the massive cleanup. Authorities are working to remove about 2,500 abandoned vehicles left stranded by the floods, with many still blocking traffic and complicating recovery efforts. And over in South Korea, 1 person was killed after a landslide struck the southeastern coastal city of Geoje. Days of torrential rain sent a wall of mud crashing into an apartment building, trapping residents inside. 2 other people were rescued as emergency crews continue search and recovery operations. Nearly 800 millimeters of rainfall has been reported across South Gyeongsang province since Saturday, prompting evacuation orders in the region. The Geoje city government has warned that the Mandong Reservoir is at high risk of overflowing, and authorities have banned all vehicle and pedestrian traffic in affected areas as roads quickly turned into rivers. Now, bus services have also been suspended, while power has been cut to about 1,500 homes and businesses. Emergency officials received more than 20 reports of residents stranded by floodwaters. The deluge marks a dramatic reversal after weeks of intense heat waves and drought. Authorities in China's eastern Zhejiang province are testing a new way to save lives on the water. At Xianghu Lake, this life buoy, which looks like a drone with its built-in propellers, is being put to the test. The AI-powered device can autonomously navigate to a person in distress, land on water, and provide buoyancy until rescuers arrive. And once the mission is over, it can fly itself back to base. Officials say the technology is designed to work alongside human rescue teams, cutting the time it actually takes to reach someone in the water when every second counts. DeepSeek, Qwen, GLM, and Kimi, they're among Chinese AI models at the center of a growing divide in Silicon Valley. The Trump administration is weighing restrictions on U.S. access, dividing the tech industry. And supporters say the models drive innovation and help American startups compete. Critics allege that some Chinese AI companies build them using technology copied from U.S. firms. Ira Spitzer files this report for CNA from San Francisco.
The U.S.-China tech war has a new battleground: AI models.
Are they using stolen materials?
With accusations from U.S. officials and angry responses from Beijing saying the American threats lack factual basis and have no legal grounding. And as the U.S. weighs sanctions and other trade restrictions against Chinese AI firms, Silicon Valley finds itself caught in the middle. At the startup Replit, software engineers move seamlessly between U.S. models like Anthropic's Claude and Chinese open-weight models like ZAI's GLM.
It's important that we think of it as an ecosystem and not this is a Chinese model, this is an American model.
Last month, an industry group called the Little Tech Association urged the Trump administration not to block access to Chinese open-weight AI models, several of which rank among the world's most advanced.
We would channel all of the sort of demand for AI into a handful of closed-weight companies. That will absolutely escalate prices, but it'll also reduce the ability to actually innovate and build new and novel products.
The accusations focus on how some Chinese AI models were built. At the heart of the controversy is distillation, a common technique in which one AI model learns from another. But done without permission, particularly at industrial scale, it can trigger accusations of intellectual property theft. The latest allegations center on China's Moonshot AI, which U.S. officials accuse of improperly distilling one of Anthropic's most advanced AI models.
If you're one of these companies that made the models that are being stolen, essentially, you have a huge problem with this. And if you're the American government, it behooves you to protect, your companies from this in any way that you can, right? It's IP theft at some level.
However, exactly when AI model distillation crosses the line into IP theft remains unsettled. With no clear global standards, many in the U.S. tech industry argue restricting access to Chinese AI would do more harm than good.
It would definitely put American companies at a disadvantage. And then as an entrepreneur, you want to think really hard whether, it makes sense for you to be based in the U.S.
And that's the crux of it. Washington may be trying to protect American AI, but Silicon Valley fears it could end up driving innovation and innovators elsewhere. For CNA, Ira Spitzer in San Francisco.
I hope you've enjoyed this Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.